All right, we're going to go back out now to CBS News New York reporter Alice Gaynor. She's joined by Christine Sloan, our colleague who has been inside the courtroom for the duration of the trial. Alice and Christine, I'm sure you have a lot of questions for each other out there.
So, Christine, you were in there when the verdict was read. First of all, let's talk about the energy in that room and what was the demeanor of Senator Menendez and also his two co-defendants.
So I've got to tell you, just right before the verdict was read, there was just complete silence for just minutes. And then when the verdict came in, it was off the bat, guilty, guilty, guilty. The senator found guilty, 16 counts, guilty. His reaction at first was just very stoic. He sat there, he nodded his head, and then he raised his hands to his face. He put his head down and then he looked at the jury. He said nothing, and the judge had warned everyone, no outbursts whatsoever during the verdict reading. His sister Caridad and his daughter Alicia were also in the courtroom. They were silent, no tears, stoic. That look of dread said absolutely nothing. Wael Hanna, one of the defendants, who was also found guilty on 6 counts, his family sat in the front. They cried very silently, but it was a very extraordinary moment. I have covered the senator for more than 30 years, and he sat there quietly, and when he walked out of the courtroom, I was the first person walking out of the courtroom, and I walked out with him. He nodded his head, and he looked very, very upset.
And we do want to point out that's the door where the senator would be coming out of. We have a camera position there, so if he does give any reaction. I know he's answered your questions before as he's come and gone from the courthouse here.
Yes, you know, he has stopped and talked to me regularly. He always comes to our camera. He says a few words. And, you know, the last words to me were that, you know, I trust the jury. I put it in God's hands and in the jury's hands. And the jury, you know, they ordered lunch very early today, so we knew something was up. They ordered their lunch. I think it was literally 30 minutes. And at 12:32, there was a verdict. The judge called the jury in, 6 men, 6 women, very diverse group of men and women. The jury foreperson, she is an investment banker. She is, from what I believe, Latina. And she read it. You know, she read the verdict. It was guilty, guilty, guilty. And, you know, they had asked questions during the deliberations that led some people to believe that perhaps they were leaning toward a not guilty verdict. But when the guilty verdict started coming in, I think everybody knew, because if the senator was found guilty on count 1, count 2, then he had to be found guilty on the rest of them as well. So these are bribery, conspiracy, extortion, acting as a foreign agent. That's the one thing that I know, having spoken to him, that he's very, very upset about. But actually, the conspiracy and the bribery charges carry more years. So they're going to be back here for sentencing on October 29th. And
what do we know about an appeal? Are they planning to file an appeal?
Yes. So during the trial and during after the summations, and when the jury was asking questions, number of the defense has said they will appeal, and they have until the middle of August to file certain motions. But they made a record of many different things, and the way that, you know, the jury at one point had asked about Fred Davies, you know, whether the senator was interfering with his prosecution. And there was a slight question about the wording, and the defense was adamant. It took 1 hour to respond to that question. So they made a record of that. So they are going to appeal this.
Now let's talk about Senator Menendez stepped down as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He did not step down as senator despite repeated calls to do so, and now some of those calls once again coming in. What do you expect to happen now that he has been found guilty on all counts? Do you see him stepping aside and resigning?
I don't see that happening right now. I think we're going to have to wait a couple of days to see what happens. He did stay in this race running as an independent. From what I understand, he has spent about $2 million of the campaign chest, the war chest that he's got. So it's uncertain what he's going to do. Well, unfortunately, he's going to have to step down at some point. But if they appeal, I'm not sure where that process will go.
It sounds like he could be expelled, but even if he's behind bars, he technically could actually still. And we know he filed to run for re-election as an independent. Let's talk about the case itself and what the jury saw in that courtroom. I know that lawyers were saying they were engaged, they were applauding them for this because, again, it is summer. People have vacations and plans and work, and they set that aside. This marks the 10th week, I believe, right?
Well, we're nearly 2 months. So it started May 13th, so we've been 2 months into this. The jury was tired. They were ready to go. And, you know, we thought that verdict was going to come in on Monday after a full day of deliberations. I think they were ready to go. And I think that indication of that early lunch to us was an indication that they were ready with a verdict. And it came very quickly.
What's some of the evidence that the jurors saw during this trial? Because, of course, defense attorneys were saying there is nothing directly linking the senator to these bribes. So what is it that jurors saw? We know prosecutors said there was a trail of hundreds of emails and text messages. So if you could explain just some of the exhibits.
So, you know, what I want to tell you is the defense in its summation. The one thing that really stood out was there was no email, no text message, no audio. They said linking the senator to actually, you know, extorting this money. There was no quid pro quo. But what they did see was a lot of gold bars and a lot of cash stuffed in envelopes. And I think from the questions that were being asked, Fred Davies, the defendant who was also, he was found guilty. Yes, he was found guilty on 7 of the counts, all counts. His fingerprints were on an envelope that was in the senator's jacket in the basement. Now, the senator's defense had said that all of the cash was found in his wife Nadine's locked closet that he had no key to. But the prosecution said, hey, wait a minute. Nadine Menendez's fingerprints were not on any of those envelopes. They were all Fred Davies' fingerprints, including the envelope that was in the senator's jacket in the basement. So that to me really stood out. They had questions about Fred Davies. And the fingerprints were one thing. And there were, most of those text messages were between Nadine Menendez and Wael Hanna, the other businessman who had a monopoly. Yes, born in Egypt. He had a monopoly on a halal business with the government of Egypt. The text messages mostly between the two of them. However, there were some significant text messages from the senator to Nadine, who passed those on to Wael Hanna, who passed them on to the government of Egypt. So the senator had sent some information on embassy personnel in Egypt, and much of them Egyptians. Nadine had gotten that text message, forwarded it to Wael Hanna, and then Hanna sent it to the government officials in Egypt.
And Christine, in terms of some of that cash that was found, defense attorneys, correct me if I'm wrong, they were also trying to explain it away as, well, it was born out of habit because Senator Menendez watched as his parents fled Cuba, and that's what they did. They hid cash like that.
Yeah, so the one line that the defense said was, you know, this started in Cuba. The senator's habit of hoarding cash started because his family fled Cuba before he was born. And they fled Cuba with just money they had in a grandfather clock. They said that the senator had spent all of his career saving money, withdrawing $400 to $403 a week from his savings account and just basically hoarding it away. But the prosecution said that the majority of the money that was found, the serial numbers on the cash, made them, you know, they were not from 1996 or from 2008. They were more recent serial numbers. So,
Christine, I want to stop you just for a moment because I believe we're awaiting a press conference. We're going to send it back to Jessica Moore in studio.